Oh yeah. You're listening to the 70s Kiss podcast. And I'm your host, the Plaster Podcaster, Steve-O from Knoxville, Tennessee. This show is about Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss. If you're looking for something else, you can just keep on knocking. Well, here we go again. We got Bobby Ward from the band Hard Sunday in the studio. What's up, Bob?
Hey, what's going on, Steve?
Not much. Want to talk to you about your 70s Kiss experience, so tell the listeners how you very first experienced the band Kiss.
When I was in grade school, everybody kept talking about this. Some of the kids, kept talking about this band, this outrageous band that was coming onto the scene with the makeup, and and it was just something I'd never even heard about. I mean, I really hadn't been into music at all before then. I was probably about 9 years old, maybe, and next thing you know, I'm out buying my very first album, which was Dressed to Kill. I think Dressed to Kill had been out for a little while. I'm thinking it was about maybe 1975, something like that.
So what was your reaction?
Well, the cover of Dressed to Kill kind of was a little bit misleading because they're all standing there in all these ill-fitted suits, and they've got the makeup on, so there was kind of like a contradiction as to what they were really like. In those days you didn't have videos, you didn't have MTV yet, and of course, anything that you could really look at or reference what these guys were like, all you knew was word of mouth, and all you had was audio. So, it wasn't before long, you're thumbing through magazines, and that's the only thing you had to go by. You're looking at live concert pictures, and you're like, wow, what in the world is this? So it was a lot different. I listened to Dress to Kill for a while, and you kind of pictured in your mind what that was, relating to that, to what you were seeing in the magazines, what they'd be like on stage, all the flamboyant, the big pyrotechnics and whatever, and it was there's a lot more imagination in those days what they were really like. I was still probably a good year and a half away from actually seeing them for the first time live in concert at that time.
Okay, what was your next album?
Well, I think the next album I bought was, I believe it was Alive. Kiss Alive came out shortly, had to have been about that time, right around there. And, of course, that was the first time I ever heard them kind of, live. And it sounded so much different, the sonic element. I mean, just them being live, and, they did some of the Dress to Kill songs, and it was even more exciting. And then, you open up the cover, and you see some of the still shots of them, in concert. And then I think there might have been like a little sleeve in there that you could open up and go through and look at all the just the live stuff on stage. And, it was incredible, and you just, I put that album on, and the next thing you know, I'm standing in front of my mirror singing and pretending to be Paul Stanley. I had no idea how he moved or what his mannerisms were really like. Because, like I said, you really didn't have that benefit of all the video that's out these days.
Yeah, so you were being Bobby Stanley. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the same
Yeah.
thing. I probably almost cracked a few mirrors trying to figure it out myself.
That was my first influence. That was it right there.
So live was your first experience, and how long after that before you saw the band live?
First seeing the band live in 1977, a Rock and Roll Over tour, and it just blows everybody's mind because I tell them, advance tickets were $5.50, day of show like $6.50, and these days, that's just unfathomable,
What was it like for a young man standing in line with his ticket, his $5 ticket to see the hottest band in the world, Kiss? What happened that day?
It's really funny because a buddy of mine from back home, we'd kind of made a pact to go together and see that show. And, I was a pretty poor kid growing up in the projects, and so I couldn't just, $5 or $6 to a 11-year-old is a lot of money, so.
Couple cases of pop bottles.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Tell my age now, huh?
Yeah.
But, we scraped together money, and my buddy, Kevin Yarber from back home, he helped me. We were literally putting pennies and dimes and nickels into this big jar, saving for the Kiss concert, to buy these tickets. And so when the day came, I remember it really well. We just hung out all day. It had to have been a week. It was either weekend. I can't remember exactly, but it had to have been on a weekend because I remember hanging out all day at the venue, or half the day, just, around back as much as we could, looking at the trucks, loading in stuff. There's so many trucks. Even back then, it's the biggest production in the world for a traveling band, for a touring band. And there was all these trucks that were loading in all this equipment, and I had no clue. I'd never been to a concert in my life, so had no clue what was in store. So we hung out all day. It was exciting, but leading up to that, it just seemed like it took for, how when you're a kid and you're looking forward to something, like if you're looking forward to Christmas or whatever, it just seems like you wait for days and months before the date gets there. But it finally got there, and we hung out that day, and it was awesome right up, leading right up into the show.
So I'm assuming this was Freedom Hall Civic Center.
Freedom Hall Civic Center.
Yeah.
Johnson City, Tennessee. Yeah.
When you went in, who was opening for the band?
The Dictators.
Okay, what was that like?
When I seen these guys, I was like, what in the world? I remember very little about them, but I just remember thinking, golly, when's these guys going to get off stage and bring on hottest band in the world, And all I could, one thing I do remember is, as soon as the lights went down in this opening act, the Dictators were getting ready to open up the show, I remember a strong odor of marijuana flowing through the air. So that was very different and interesting for 11-year-old kids sitting there.
The scent of Sinsemilla.
Yeah.
So you're a kid, you're sitting in there and you're smelling this marijuana, and all of a sudden the first note hits, and I'm going to assume that it was Deuce or Detroit Rock City.
I think it was Detroit Rock City. They had been there, I think, just a few months before. Kiss in those days. They were putting out an album every 6 months.
Right.
And now after learning a lot about what they were doing, I now know why they were doing that. They were trying to keep catalog. They were trying to keep stuff on the market. That's the reason they were doing that. But they had been there just a few months before, and I was a fan then, and I didn't get to go to the Destroyer tour. I didn't get to go to that show, so they'd been there just not long before that.
There's some pictures that I have on stage. One of them was on stage, and one of them is backstage during that. But
Really?
yeah. So I'll send those to you when we get off here. But check us out. So you're a kid and you hear that spitting out this blood and breathing fire. What was your reaction to all that? I mean, how did that affect you?
Well, I had heard that at some point in the show, Gene Simmons breathes the fire. That was always the mystique of the band. And I'm thinking, how in the world how does he do this? But there again, you never had the benefit of video, so you can only imagine these things in your head as to how this is going to lead up to this, how it's going to happen. I remember hearing the stories about that and the spitting blood, and one of the biggest things that really impacted me when those curtains went down, and I went into Detroit Rock City. This big castle set up for a stage, and just the whole theatric aspect of it was just unbelievable. It was almost like a little movie playing out. But the breathing fire and the spitting blood, I mean, that was just part of it. It was incredible.
Yeah, well, you had Elvis Presley at that time, which was the biggest thing on TV, which commercially that was being put on over the airways and on the TV tube, Elvis Presley, and you see him, dressed in his sparkly little clothes and his sunglasses and sideburns and, sticking his finger up in the air. And at that time, that was the biggest thing going around, you know what I mean? And then you're this kid and you walk into Freedom Hall and you see this guy spit blood and blow fire. That had to just kind of line a match underneath of Elvis and just kind of made him go down the scale a little bit.
Yeah. I always argued with my dad about, he was an Elvis fan, and we always went back and forth about, how Kiss was just trash and blah, blah, blah. Elvis was the king and whatnot. And I remember showing him a picture one time of Elvis wearing Kiss makeup. There's a picture there out there somewhere. And I showed it to him, and he's like, "Oh, this has been doctored, whatnot." But Elvis that time, I mean, he was 20 years into his career,
Yeah.
And
I remember your dad too now, so I kind of know what that conversation was like. And your dad was something else. But which is going to be another question I ask you here in a minute about your parents. But so, yeah, I remember right around that same time, I didn't live too far away from you, but I hadn't met you yet. And I remember sitting on the porch, just daydreaming about the band. I'd always have my magazines and my albums and stuff out, and the kids next door would come over, and we would talk about it and, draw or whatever. And I remember this kid running down the street going, "Elvis is dead. Elvis is dead." He was just like running down the sidewalk. And I remember going in there telling my dad, "Hey, this kid running down the sidewalk said Elvis is dead,
Right.
And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "Son, the King's died." And I was like, "Well," I said, "according to these magazines, Kiss is king, Dad." I can remember that. I can remember that to this day.
Pretty good.
And he was just, he was just kind of like your dad, but, just kind of putting it down. And I was telling Pat in a podcast before this, when the Sex Pistols hit, that kind of opened me up for freedom with Kiss, because my parents weren't really too cool about me, having Kiss memorabilia and all that stuff. So that's my next question for you. So I know your father, and I know how he probably came about with you, but did your mother and your father both, when they very first saw this, were they saying that, these guys are demons, or trying to steer you away from them? Did you have any issues with your parents when it came to the band?
I never had them. They never were on that trip. They never were, these guys are evil, I don't know if they just kind of looked at them as cartoon characters or what.
Like a joke?
Yeah, I mean, like my mom never, they never, I grew up with my mom and my stepdad, they never threw that little, that thing down at me like, you're not allowed to have this in the house or whatever. And I talk to friends today, they're like, "Man, I wasn't allowed to have, this album or that album in my house. I had to sneak it in. I had, they never were that strict about it, so they just kind of, musically let me listen to whatever,
Well, that's cool.
I mean, in those days, there wasn't any bad language or anything.
Right. And that's cool. My dad was kind of the same way because, my dad was a musician, so I had him on my side to an extent. When the Sex Pistols came out, it just kind of opened up a big door, like I was saying, because, he hated the Sex Pistols because everything they were saying in the papers about those guys were completely out in left field when, as far as Kiss was concerned. Kiss was bubblegum compared to those guys.
Right.
I met Bobby, I think, in 1983. We were playing softball. I joined a softball team that he was on, and that's how we met. We went to the state championship and kind of hung out and became friends. And at that time, I was jamming with this guy named John Steffner in his basement. We're trying to figure it all out. We had our drums and guitars down there, and I was learning how to play guitar at that time, really, and I was a drummer. I had more experience playing drums, and I talked to Bobby, and I said, "Hey, man, we need a singer. Would you be interested in trying to sing in a band?" He's like, "Oh yeah, man. I thought about that. And I was like, "Well, follow me." So
I think we kind of brushed on that, ever so slightly at some point. And I remember somebody talking to you because you used to carry your guitar around, and they were asking you about playing and the band and whatnot. And then they asked me, well, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm thinking, I don't play anything, so I just blurted out, well, I'm the singer.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember distinctly that I had bought this amp. And I don't know what we were doing with this amp. We were taking it to sing out of or something. And me and you walked from Keystone down the projects all the way to John Steffner's house over in the Gump Edition. Had these two poor kids, walking to the rich kid's house to jam. It was kind of an awkward situation there, but John was a real cool guy. And we went down there and we sprung out some songs and we jammed around a little bit, but I don't think you ever did anything with us. It was later on.
No, it never really came together or something,
Yeah. Now, was it? Did you sing in any other bands before we actually got Damage Incorporated together?
No.
Okay.
No. Well, yeah. I played with Bobby Marks in high school. I was in the very last part of Scavenger. In fact, we never even played out.
Blitzkrieg.
I never played out with them as Scavenger. Blitzkrieg.
Yeah.
Blitzkrieg, yeah. In high school, Robbie Watts.
Yeah, I do remember now. It had to take me a second, but so Scavenger and Blitzkrieg, and I also had went over and thought about auditioning for Scavenger too, and I think we might have went together. I can't remember.
After Scavenger kind of dismantled, Adam Stein, Bobby Marks, and me and you had jammed with a couple guys there in Jonesboro, lived down from you, and then me and Adam and Bobby, I was like, hey, I know a bass player and a drummer, so we went over and started jamming with the drummer, like Adam's playing bass, and we called that band Foreplay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course Damage Incorporated came on right after that.
Right after that. Now we could sit back and tell some stories about Damage Incorporated.
Oh yeah,
there was quite a few things happened, and just so you guys know, we were like this glam band in the '80s. We had come out of Kiss. We were listening to like Motley Crue and Dokken and just all of those 80s bands that had came out at that time, and we were trying to emulate those guys, and we were covering their songs. Yeah. And so I can still remember getting ready at your dad's apartment to go play Club Venus that night, and him, shooting cracks at us over our hair poofed out and what we were way we were dressed.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, his line always to me, my dad was in the country music, bluegrass industry for years and years. He worked for Bill Monroe, bluegrass legend, worked with a lot of different country legends, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, just to name a couple. But he always told me, cut that hair, son. We'll go to Nashville and I'll make a star out of you. You know enough people.
Yeah.
Back then, that was like the most uncool thing you could possibly do. So it was like, nah, hell no. I'm going to go to Los Angeles and be a rock star.
Yeah, I can remember. It was almost like long hair could get you put in jail. It was weird. Yeah. But at the same time, it was cool. So later on, actually right around the same time, Kiss came to town, to get back on the subject here, and I was working at a music store in Johnson City called Pro Music, and we carried Hamer guitars, and the owner of the store said, "Hey, you going to the Kiss concert?" And I was like, "Yeah." I said, I've got a ticket. I'm going to go. He's like, "Well, I'll tell you what." He goes, "I'm on the phone with the representative from Hamer Guitars right now. He's offering some backstage passes. Would you like the backstage passes?" And I was like, "Well, hell yeah, I got a friend I can call right now. We'll go." So I called.
I'll never forget it, yeah.
Yeah, so I called Bobby up and I said, "Hey, I got these 2 passes, man, Kiss backstage." And I believe it was the Animalize tour.
It was Animalize.
Mm-hmm.
It was Animalize, yeah. And
me and Bobby had went early that day, like he was saying earlier, how you would go and hang out, and we went inside, and Paul Stanley was out there looking at the guys that were setting up the stage and the upriggers, mainly up in the up at the top, because one of their shows, I guess maybe 2 or 3 shows before that one, it might have been the show right before that one.
I think it was the show before. It was in Asheville.
Somebody had died on their crew, had fell from the ceiling, and he was out there looking at the stage hands, making sure everything was being set up right, and there was me and Bobby, and I can remember a couple other people kind of hanging around us and trying to meet Paul Stanley. So he kind of walks over to us, and everybody's asking him questions and getting him to sign autographs, and basically everybody was just kind of handing them their ticket to get them to sign a ticket. And as he was signing my ticket, I asked him, I said, "Hey, what's going on with Ace Frehley? When's Frehley's Comet coming out?" And he just kind of looked at me real smart and said, "I don't know, won't you give him a call?" And when he did that, I tore up the ticket and threw it on the ground. I said, "I don't need your fucking autograph. You're an asshole." And Bob,
I think it may have just come off so casual.
Yeah.
I think he was just being a bit of a smart ass,
Yeah, well, it kind of crushed me because, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Animalize might have been my very first Kiss show. And at the same time, it was the very first time I'd ever met one of the members. And I was a huge Kiss fan, and when he did that, it just kind of crushed me, a little bit. I was like, oh, man, I'm finally meeting one of my heroes, and, he's being an asshole. But anyway, so
he was nice to me, though.
Yeah, he was. He was nice. But anyway, so he just kind of looked at me when I did that. I just threw my ticket down, and we had those VIP passes on. And Bobby was like, "Oh, man, you got to be cool. You're going to get us kicked out of here. We got VIP passes and the show hadn't even started. You're going to get us kicked out." And I was like, "Oh, man, he's being an asshole." So we go backstage and we're mingling around backstage. We're eating their food,
drinking Heineken, underage.
We meet the bass tech, Romeo, and because I had tore the ticket up and threw it on the ground in front of him after he signed it, Romeo had said, "Hey, you guys want to go back and meet the band?" Because when he walked out and said, "Hey, here's these 2 guys that are from Hamer Guitars, or representing Hamer Guitars, and the VIP passes," he took us up on the stage and showed us around the equipment and pulled out Gene Simmons' drawer and took 2 hands and went into this drawer. It was full of picks. And he says, "You guys want some picks?" And we're like, "Yeah, man, yeah." And So he says, well, hold out your hand. And he said, no, both hands. And he filled both of my hands full of picks, just as much as I could carry. A Gene Simmons
picks. I had a bunch of those, yeah.
And all of our friends, the lights were still on, and all of our friends were out, on the floor on the barricade. The people had started coming in, and they saw us up there, and they were yelling at us, and they saw them. People saw him giving us picks. So as we were walking around, people were like hanging over the barricade and hanging over the sides, going, "Hey man, I'll give you $10 for one of those picks." And I can remember I was out there selling those picks for $10, $15, $20 a piece. And
run around like a bunch of hoodlums.
Yeah. And I can remember Bobby saying, "Oh man, you're going to get us thrown out of here." The show hadn't even started. So the guy's name was Romeo. It was Gene's bass tech, and I don't know if he's still with him or not, but he's a real nice guy. Kind of reminded me of Eric Carr a little bit.
Yeah.
And he asked us if we wanted to go meet Kiss, and we're like, "Oh man," I was like, "We better not, dude. Paul Stanley will remember me tearing his ticket up, and they'll kick us out." Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't go back to the dressing room and meet him. And so we watched the show. We were going back and forth, and we thought, our shit didn't stink. We had we had VIP passes, and we were just pushing it around. And so after the show, Romeo says, "Hey, we're going, we're going to have a party back at Blake's Lounge. We're just going to kind of take over the lounge. You guys are invited." So we went ahead and went down to Blake's Lounge, got a table. And the Kiss, I think a couple of them were already there. Crocus was there. That's who was opening. And they were kind of sitting around us, and Eric Carr come over and just sit down with us. Now, you did go to that, right? You did go to, because I can't remember.
I don't think I made it to that. I don't remember doing anything like that.
Okay. You didn't go. For some reason, you must have went your way and I went mine. Right.
I do remember the road manager come up to us and telling us our backstage passes had expired.
Yeah, because we were drinking all their booze. We
kind of hung to the side of the stage from the rest of the show. But yeah, I don't think I made it to the after party.
Right. Well, after the show, I went down to the local Holiday Inn, which was where Kiss was staying. Gene Simmons was up in the room, and there was a line of girls going down the sidewalk. You could see that when you pulled in. They were all waiting to go in his room. And Paul Stanley was actually in Blake's Lounge, and Eric Carr and Bruce Kulick and some of the guys in Crocus. And I went in and sat down at the table, and Eric Carr comes over and says, "Hey, I'll sit with you guys and buy you all some martinis under one condition." And we're like, "Oh, what, man?" He says, "We don't talk about Kiss." And I was like, "Oh," and then he goes, "No, I'm just kidding, man. We can talk about anything you want." And he was just like, he was like buying us martinis and, telling us about Ace Frehley shooting up the next door neighbor's house or something about the pharmacy, and his wife got in trouble, went to jail over a pharmacy or something. I can't remember.
Well, he was always regarded as a really nice guy.
And he was a really nice cat. And we were sitting at this real long table. I was sitting at one end of the table, and Paul Stanley was sitting at the other end. And Eric Carr was sitting with us. And I guess it was some of the people, his managers or whatever, that was sitting with him. And he just kept looking at me and eyeballing me the whole time because he remembered me tearing his ticket up.
Right.
But I wish you could. I wish you could have went to that because it was real cool, hanging out with him and stuff. But
yeah.
So let's talk about what's going on now. So I know that Bobby had gotten into some bands and progressed over the years, and Damage Incorporated. Basically, you split and went off into the Navy, got married, and you were out of it for a while. Kind of tell us what happened then.
Oh yeah, out for a long time. In fact, right about 20 years or so, really, before I ever really performed live again, in 2007 with Hard Sunday. Hard Sunday is a local band, and they've been around probably 4 years before I got into them. So I went I had seen an ad in I've been doing some karaoke and whatnot. I'm getting back into actually singing and whatnot, and won a few contests. And everybody's like, "Hey, man, you're pretty good." Like, well, I used to play, I used to play in the band with him. And so I seen an ad in a musician's magazine up here about wanting a singer, guitar player. So when I called up, I told Glenn Vandell, which is one of the founding members of Hard Sunday, that I didn't play guitar, not good enough to really do it, on stage, full time and sing. He's like, well, we're just kind of looking for somebody to play guitar and sing, but come on down, we'll do an audition, take a look, So next thing you know, I'm down audition. I do like 2 songs, and they turn to me and they're like, you're the guy. We'll find another guy to play guitar. So it became a 5-piece at that point. That's when basically when my history with Hard Sunday started.
So you played for, I don't know, what, 5-6 years with them guys?
Yeah, I've been with them since 2007. We've gone through, we won decent exposure up here in Central Kentucky, which is an Lexington radio station sponsors it, and it's the longest running battle of bands by a major radio station in the United States. We won that. It's got a long history, well over 30 years. Won that, and that was in 2012, and that was a big year for us because shortly thereafter, we got to open up for Bret Michaels, and like 3 or 4 weeks later, opened up for Lita Ford, which was really cool and great experience. And it's just been a blast. And then we released our CD that same year, July that same year. So it's been pretty awesome. So we've gone through some lineup changes now. 2 guys left. One of the founding members left. We're down, and we added a bass player, and we're a 4-piece right now. So going strong.
If people wanted to get a hold of Hard Sunday or see you guys live, what's your website and your Facebook information?
Our website is hardsundayrocks.com, and you can also get a hold of us on Facebook by going to facebook.com/hardsundayRocks. I'll take you to our Facebook, Twitter @HardSunday. You can get me on Twitter at Bobby the Singer. We'll have our schedule out there, and we're hoping to get back in the studio and do have some more stuff, on CD by end of the year. Be nice. That's our goal anyway.
Okay, cool. Well, I got one more question to ask you, and it's just the theme of the show right now because of what's going on. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Give me your spiel. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of people blame Gene and Paul. There may be some that say, some of the newer Kiss fans that say, well, we don't really remember those other 2 guys that much, or maybe they picked up on the history somewhere in the 90s or even just here of lately. Kiss has had such a long history. You got different tiers of fans. You've got different layers of loyalship. I mean, I think who really dropped the ball on this was the Hall of Fame. They should have inducted these guys when they were first eligible. There's no excuse as to why they did not, other than they really have no clue as to what's going on in the world of music, especially rock and roll. They should have inducted these guys in '96 when they were first eligible. The band was together. They were doing a reunion tour. It would have been perfect,
Number 1 selling act of the year.
Yeah, that would have been in the perfect world, that would have been great. But they didn't. Well, we don't live in a perfect world. So, the alternative to that is, I think, in a little bit of, if I play the devil's advocate here for a little bit, and defending a little bit probably of what Gene and Paul are doing now, is they've spent a long time trying to sell this latest version of Kiss. And they don't want to give, I think what they're afraid of, if you'll recall on the MTV, right before the reunion tour in 96, what sparked that entire comeback, that entire reunion thing, was when Peter and Ace walked on to the acoustic set that was on MTV when they were doing the acoustic unplugged and did like a couple songs. Then all of a sudden, this kind of avalanched into, snowballed into what became the reunion tours. So I think they're kind of, I think they're a little disgusted with the Hall of Fame anyway, that they weren't there sooner. And B, I think they're afraid of damaging the brand of what they've, fought for a lot of years on this latest outing of Peter and Ace. To it's kind of like they don't want that to happen again. They don't want. But my personal take on it is, hey, they should get together. They should say, look, this isn't the start of a reunion. This is going to be the last time we do this. Those guys should all come out in full makeup, suits. Hell, if I had my choice, I should come out dressed like 1975 and come out, do 2 or 3 songs, and that's it. Just for the fans. And that's what I'm disappointed about.
What about the other guys that have been in the band? Do you think that they should be inducted with them? Or do you think it should just be the original 4 like Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has been pushing?
As far as inducted, I think the original 4. Gene says, I've seen different quotes. I don't know what's true and what isn't, but I've seen different things where they say, well, that's not fair to guys that have been in the band longer than Ace and Peter were in the band. But from one point of view, okay, that may be a correct statement, but in another point of view, that's not the guys that, made the magic happen to get to the point to where those other guys could be in the band that was known as Kiss. So I think just the original 4 should be inducted. I think everybody else that ever had any kind of role or ever, stepped on stage as a part of Kiss, I think they should be a part of the show in some way. I don't think they necessarily all have to be up there at the same time. But as far as like putting guys up there in makeup and putting them up there, I think it should be the original guys.
Agreed.
And and that's just it's just my opinion, and I think a lot of other people's opinion too.
Well, this is the thing. This is one of the quotes. Gene Simmons says, we've had this machine together for 40 years. But I got news for Gene Simmons. Out of those 40 years, there's only been 2 things that's happened since pre-79, which is the original Kiss. 2 things that it's happened that's even gotten close to the original Kiss in the 70s. One we already mentioned was the MTV show where the reunion happened. And
right.
The second is 1996 when the reunion actually happened. Okay? So
right.
Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley need to quit patting themselves on the back like they've done something.
Right.
They've been trying to recreate Kiss since the 70s, and they have not been able to do it. So in my opinion, Kiss became a different band. I'm not saying they became a bad band. I'm just saying they're not the same band.
Right.
So it's just a hard argument to argue with a 70s Kiss fan. It's one of the reasons I have this show, is so people, fans can call in, voice their opinion, and tell us all what they experienced in the 70s, because I'm going to tell you right now, in the 70s, Kiss was as huge as Elvis. Kiss is not as huge as Elvis today. Or let's use somebody else, for instance, Lady Gaga. They're not even on her level. And to me, she's not even a musician, I know she probably plays or whatever, but you know, they put the wrong people on the top, in my opinion.
Right.
But
yeah, that's a whole nother subject. Yeah.
Bobby Ward, the singer of Hard Sunday. Thanks
for having me. Appreciate it.
So that's a wrap. Well, that's it, folks. Until next time, this is the Plaster Podcaster saying, I'm out.